Odin goes to Mimir's well, his sacrifice for wisdom. And so Odin, no longer riding on Sleipnir, his eight-legged steed, no longer wearing his golden armor and his eagle helmet, and without even his spear in his hand, traveled through Midgard, the world of men, and made his way toward Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. No longer was he called Odin All-Father, but Vegtam, the Wanderer. He wore a cloak of dark blue, and he carried a traveler's staff in his hands. And now, as he went toward Mimir's well, which was near to Jotunheim, he came upon a giant riding on a great stag. Odin seemed a man to men, and a giant to giants. He went beside the giant on the great stag, and the two talked together. "Who art thou, O brother?" Odin asked the giant. "I am Vafthrudner, the wisest of the giants," said the one who was riding on the stag. Odin knew him then. Vafthrudner was indeed the wisest of the giants, and many went to strive to gain wisdom from him. But those who went to him had to answer the riddles Vafthrudner asked, and if they failed to answer, the giant took their heads off. "I am Vegtam, the Wanderer," Odin said, "and I know who thou art, O Vafthrudner. I would strive to learn something from thee." The giant laughed, showing his teeth. "Ho," he said, "I am ready for a game with thee. Dost thou know the stakes? My head to thee if I cannot answer any question thou wilt ask. And if thou canst not answer any question that I may ask, then thy head goes to me. Ho. And now let us begin." "I am ready," Odin said. "Then tell me," said Vafthrudner, "tell me the name of the river that divides Asgard from Jotunheim." "Eifling is the name of that river," said Odin. "Eifling that is dead cold, yet never frozen." "Thou hast answered rightly, O Wanderer," said the giant, "but thou hast still to answer other questions. What are the names of the horses that day and night drive across the sky?" "Skinfax and Rimfax," Odin answered. Vafthrudner was startled to hear one say the names that were known only to the gods and to the wisest of the giants. There was only one question now that he might ask before it came to the stranger's turn to ask him questions. "Tell me," said Vafthrudner, "what is the name of the plain on which the last battle will be fought?" "The plain of Vagard," said Odin, "the plain that is 100 miles long and 100 miles across." It was now Odin's turn to ask Vafthrudner questions. What will be the last words that Odin will whisper into the ear of Balder, his dear son? He asked. Very startled was the giant Vafthrudner at that question. He sprang to the ground and looked at the stranger keenly. "Only Odin knows what his last words to Balder will be," he said, and only Odin would have asked that question. "Thou art Odin, O Wanderer, and thy question I cannot answer." "Then," said Odin, "if thou wouldst keep thy head, answer me this. What price will Mimir ask for a draught from the well of wisdom that he guards?" "He will ask thy right eye as a price, O Odin," said Vafthrudner. "Will he ask no less a price than that?" said Odin. "He will ask no less a price. Many have come to him for a draught from the well of wisdom, but no one yet has given the price Mimir asks. I have answered thy question, O Odin. Now give up thy claim to my head, and let me go on my way." "I give up my claim to thy head," said Odin. Then Vafthrudner, the wisest of the giants, went on his way, riding on his great stag. It was a terrible price that Mimir would ask for a draught from the well of wisdom, and very troubled was Odin All-Father when it was revealed to him, his right eye, for all time to be without the sight of his right eye. Almost he would have turned back to Asgard, giving up his quest for wisdom. He went on, turning neither to Asgard nor to Mimir's well, and when he went toward the south, he saw Muspelheim, where stood Searcher with the flaming sword. a terrible figure who would one day join the giants in their war against the gods. And when he turned north, he heard the roaring of the cauldron Hvergelmar as it poured itself out of Niflheim, the place of darkness and dread. And Odin knew that the world must not be left between Searcher, who would destroy it with fire, and Niflheim, that would gather it back to darkness and nothingness. He, the eldest of the gods, would have to win the wisdom that would help to save the world. And so, with his face stern in front of his loss and pain, Odin Allfather turned and went toward Mimir's well. It was under the great root of Yggdrasil, the root that grew out of Jotunheim, and there sat Mimir, the guardian of the well of wisdom, with his deep eyes bent upon the deep water. And Mimir, who had drunk every day from the well of wisdom, knew who it was that stood before him. "Hail, Odin, eldest of the gods," he said. Then Odin made reverence to Mimir, the wisest of the world's beings. "I would drink from your well, Mimir," he said. "There is a price to be paid. All who have come here to drink have shrunk from paying that price. Will you, eldest of the gods, pay it?" "I will not shrink from the price that has to be paid, Mimir," said Odin Allfather. "Then drink," said Mimir. He filled up a great horn with water from the well and gave it to Odin. Odin took the horn in both his hands and drank and drank. And as he drank, all the future became clear to him. He saw all the sorrows and troubles that would fall upon men and gods. But he saw, too, why the sorrows and troubles had to fall. And he saw how they might be borne, so that gods and men, by being noble in the days of sorrow and trouble, would leave in the world a force that one day, a day that was far off indeed, would destroy the evil that brought terror and sorrow and despair into the world. Then when he had drunk out of the great horn that Mimir had given him, he put his hand to his face, and he plucked out his right eye. Terrible was the pain that Odin Allfather endured, but he made no groan, nor moan. He bowed his head and put his cloak before his face, as Mimir took the eye and let it sink deep into the water of the well of wisdom. And there the eye of Odin stayed, shining up through the water, a sign to all who came to that place of the price that the Father of the gods had paid for his wisdom. Odin faces an evil man. Once, when his wisdom was less great, Odin had lived in the world of men. Frigga, his queen, was with him then. They had lived on a bleak island, and they were known as Grimnir, the fisherman, and his wife. Always Odin and Frigga were watching over the sons of men, watching to know which ones they would foster and train, so that they might have the strength and spirit to save the world from the power of the giants. And while they were staying on the bleak island, Odin and Frigga saw the sons of King Hrodding, and both thought that in them the spirit of heroes could be fostered. Odin and Frigga made plans to bring the children to them, so that they might be under their care and training. One day, the boys went fishing. A storm came and drove their boat on the rocks of the island where Odin and Frigga lived. They brought them to their hut, Odin and Frigga, and they told them they would care for them and train them through the winter, and that in the spring they would build a boat that would carry them back to their father's country. "We shall see," said Odin to Frigga that night. "We shall see which of the two can be formed into the noblest hero." He said that because Frigga favored one of the boys, and he favored the other. Frigga thought well of the elder boy, Agnar, who had a gentle voice and quiet and kindly ways. But Odin thought more of the younger boy. Geirrod, his name was, and he was strong and passionate, with a high and a loud voice. Odin took Geirrod into his charge, and he showed him how to fish and hunt. He made the boy even bolder than he was by making him leap from rock to rock, and by letting him climb the highest cliffs and jump across the widest chasms. He would bring him to the den of the bear and make him fight for his life with the spear he had made for him. Agnar went to the chase too, and showed his skill and boldness. But Geirrod overcame him in nearly every trial. What a hero Geirrod will be, Odin would often say. Agnar stayed often with Frigga. He would stay beside her while she spun, listening to the tales she told, and asking such questions as brought him more and more wisdom. And Agnar heard of Asgard, and of the dwellers in Asgard, and of how they protected Midgard, the world of men, from the giants of Jotunheim. Agnar, though he did not speak out, said in his own mind that he would give all his life, and all his strength, and all his thought to helping the work of the gods. Spring came and Odin built a boat for Geirrod and Agnar. They could go back now to their own country, and before they set out Odin told Geirrod that one day he would come to visit him. And do not be too proud to receive a fisherman in your hall, Geirrod, said Odin. A king should give welcome to the poorest who comes to his hall. I will be a hero, no doubt of that, Geirrod answered, and I would be a king too. Only Agnar little good was born before me. Agnar bade goodbye to Frigga and to Odin, thanking them for the care they had taken of Geirrod and himself. He looked into Frigga's eyes, and he told her that he would strive to learn how he might fight the battle for the gods. The two went into the boat, and they rowed away. They came near to King Hrauding's realm. They saw the castle overlooking the sea. Then Geirrod did a terrible thing. He turned the boat back toward the sea, and he cast the oars away. Then, for he was well fit to swim the roughest sea and climb the highest cliffs, he plunged into the water and struck out toward the shore. And Agnar, left without oars, went drifting out to sea. Geirrod climbed the high cliffs and came to his father's castle. King Hrauding, who had given up both of his sons for lost, was rejoiced to see him. Geirrod told of Agnar that he had fallen out of the boat on their way back, and that he had been drowned. King Hrauding, who had thought both of his sons were gone from him, was glad enough that one had come safe. He put Geirrod beside him on the throne, and when he died, Geirrod was made king over the people. And now Odin, having drunk from Mimir's well, went through the kingdoms of men, judging kings and simple people according to the wisdom he had gained. He came at last to the kingdom that Geirrod ruled over. Odin thought that of all the kings he had judged to be noble, Geirrod would assuredly be the noblest. He went to the king's house as a wanderer, blind of one eye, wearing a cloak of dark blue and with a wanderer's staff in his hands. As he drew near the king's house, men on dark horses came riding behind him. The first of the men did not turn his horse as he came near the wanderer, but rode on, nearly trampling him to the ground. As they came before the king's house, the men on the dark horses shouted for servants. Only one servant was in the stable. He came out and took the horse of the first man. Then the others called upon the wanderer to tend their horses. He had to hold the stirrups for some of them to dismount. Odin knew who the first man was. He was Geirrod the king, and he knew who the man who served in the stable was. He was Agnar, Geirrod's brother. By the wisdom he had gained, he knew that Agnar had come back to his father's kingdom in the guise of a servant, and he knew that Geirrod did not know who this servant was. They went into the stable together. Agnar took bread and broke it and gave some to the wanderer. He gave him, too, straw to seat himself on. But in a while, Odin said, I would seat myself at the fire in the king's hall and eat my supper of meat. Nay, stay here, Agnar said. I will give you more bread and a wrap to cover yourself with. Do not go to the door of the king's house, for the king is angry today, and he might repulse you. How? Said Odin. A king turn away a wanderer who comes to his door. It cannot be that he would do it. Today he is angry, Agnar said. Again he begged him not to go to the door of the king's house. But Odin rose up from the straw on which he was seated and went to the door. A porter, hunchbacked and with long arms, stood at the door. I am a wanderer, and I would have rest and food in the king's hall, Odin said. Not in this king's hall, said the hunchback porter. He would have barred the door to Odin, but the voice of the king called him away. Odin then strode into the hall and saw the king at table with his friends, all dark-bearded and cruel-looking men. And when Odin looked on them, he knew that the boy whom he had trained in nobility had become a king over robbers. Since you have come into the hall where we eat, sing to us, wanderer, shouted one of the dark men. I will sing to you, said Odin. Then he stood between two of the stone pillars in the hall, and he sang a song, reproaching the king for having fallen into an evil way of life, and denouncing all for following the cruel ways of robbers. Seize him, said the king. When Odin's song was finished, the dark men threw themselves upon Odin and put chains around him and bound him between the stone pillars of the hall. He came into this hall for warmth, and warmth he shall have, said Geirrod. He called upon his servants to heap up wood around him. They did this. Then the king, with his own hand, put a blazing torch to the wood, and the faggots blazed up around the wanderer. The faggots burned round and round him. But the fire did not burn the flesh of Odin, All-Father. The king and the king's friends stood round, watching with delight the fires blaze round a living man. The faggots all burned away, and Odin was left standing there with his terrible gaze fixed upon the men who were so hard and cruel. They went to sleep, leaving him chained to the pillars of the hall. Odin could have broken the chains and pulled down the pillars, but he wanted to see what else would happen in this king's house. The servants were ordered not to bring food or drink to him, but at dawn, when there was no one near, Agnar came to him with a horn of ale and gave it to him to drink. The next evening, when the king came back from his robberies, and when he and his friends, sitting down at the tables, had eaten like wolves, he ordered the faggots to be placed around Odin, and again they stood around, watching in delight the fire playing around a living man. And as before, Odin stood there, unhurt by the fire, and his steady and terrible gaze made the king hate him more and more. And all day he was kept in chains, and the servants were forbidden to bring him food or drink. None knew that a horn of ale was brought to him at dawn, and night after night, for 8 nights, this went on. Then, on the 9th night, when the fires around him had been lighted, Odin lifted up his voice and began to sing a song. His song became louder and louder, and the king and the king's friends, and the servants of the thing's house, had to stand still and hearken to it. Odin sang about Geirrod, the king, how the gods had protected him, giving him strength and skill, and how instead of making a noble use of that strength and skill, he had made himself like one of the wild beasts. Then he sang of how the vengeance of the gods was about to fall on this ignoble king. The flames died down, and Geirrod and his friends saw before them not a friendless wanderer, but one who looked more kingly than any king of the earth. The chains fell down from his body, and he advanced toward the evil company. Then Geirrod rushed upon him with his sword in hand to kill him. The sword struck him, but Odin remained unhurt. Thy life runs out. The gods, they are wroth with thee. Draw near, thou canst. Odin, thou shalt see. So Odin sang, and in fear of his terrible gaze, Geirrod and his company shrank away, and as they shrank away, they were changed into beasts, into the wolves that ranged the forests. And Agnar came forward, and him Odin declared to be king. All the folk were glad when Agnar came to rule over them, for they had been oppressed by Girod in his cruel reign. And Agnar was not only kind, but he was strong and victorious in his rule. Odin wins for men the magic mead. It was the dwarfs who brewed the magic mead, and it was the giants who hid it away, but it was Odin who brought it from the place where it was hidden and gave it to the sons of men. Those who drank of the magic mead became very wise, and not only that, but they could put their wisdom into such beautiful words that everyone who heard would love and remember it. The dwarfs brewed the magic mead through cruelty and villainy. They made it out of the blood of a man. The man was Kvasir the poet. He had wisdom, and he had such beautiful words with it that what he said was loved and remembered by all. The dwarfs brought Kvasir down into their caverns, and they killed him there. Now, they said, we have Kvasir's blood and Kvasir's wisdom. No one else will have his wisdom but us. They poured the blood into 3 jars, and they mixed it with honey, and from it they brewed the magic mead. Having killed a man, the dwarfs became more and more bold. They came out of their caverns and went up and down through Midgard, the world of men. They went into Jotunheim and began to play their evil tricks on the most harmless of the giants. They came upon one giant who was very simple. Gilling was his name. They persuaded Gilling to row them out to sea in a boat. Then the 2 most cunning of the dwarfs, Galar and Fjalar, steered the boat onto a rock. The boat split. Gilling, who could not swim, was drowned. The dwarfs clambered up on pieces of the boat and came safely ashore. They were so delighted with their evil tricks that they wanted to play some more of them. Galar and Fjalar then thought of a new piece of mischief they might do. They led their band of dwarfs to Gilling's house and screamed out to his wife that Gilling was dead. The giant's wife began to weep and lament. At last she rushed out of the house weeping and clapping her hands. Now Galar and Fjalar had clambered up on the lintel of the house, and as she came running out, they cast a millstone on her head. It struck her, and Gilling's wife fell down dead. More and more the dwarfs were delighted at the destruction they were making. They were so insolent now that they made up songs and sang them. Songs that were all a boast of how they had killed Kvasir the poet and Gilling the giant and Gilling's wife. They stayed around Jotunheim, tormenting all whom they were able to torment, and flattering themselves that they were great and strong. They stayed too long, however. Suttung, Gilling's brother, tracked them down and captured them. Suttung was not harmless and simple like Gilling, his brother. He was cunning, and he was covetous. Once they were in his hands, the dwarfs had no chance of making an escape. He took them and left them on a rock in the sea, a rock that the tide would cover. The giant stood up in the water taller than the rock, and the tide as it came in did not rise above his knees. He stood there watching the dwarfs as the water rose up round them, and they became more and more terrified. "Oh, take us off the rock, good Suttung," they cried out to him. "Take us off the rock, and we will give you gold and jewels. Take us off the rock, and we will give you a necklace as beautiful as Brisingamen." So they cried out to him, but the giant Suttung only laughed at them. He had no need of gold or jewels. Then Fjalar and Galar cried out, "Take us off the rock, and we will give you the jars of the magic mead we have brewed." "The magic mead," said Suttung. "This is something that no one else has. It would be well to get it, for it might help us in the battle against the gods. Yes, I will get the magic mead from them." He took the band of dwarfs off the rock, but he held Galar and Fjalar, their chiefs, while the others went into their caverns and brought up the jars of the magic mead. Suttung took the mead and brought it to a cavern in a mountain near his dwelling, and thus it happened that the magic mead, brewed by the dwarfs through cruelty and villainy came into the hands of the giants. And the story now tells how Odin, the eldest of the gods, at that time in the world, as Vectum, the Wanderer, took the magic mead out of Suttung's possession and brought it into the world of men. Now, Suttung had a daughter named Gunnlod, and she, by her goodness and her beauty, was like Gerda and Skadi, the giant maids whom the dwellers in Asgard favored. Suttung, that he might have a guardian for the magic mead, enchanted Gunnlod, turning her from a beautiful giant maiden into a witch with long teeth and sharp nails. He shut her into the cavern where the jars of the magic mead were hidden. Odin heard of the death of Kvasir, whom he honored above all men. The dwarfs who slew him he had closed up in their caverns, so that they were never again able to come out into the world of men. And then he set out to get the magic mead that he might give it to men, so that, tasting it, they would have wisdom, and words would be at their command that would make wisdom loved. And remembered how Odin won the magic mead out of the rock-covered cavern where Suttung had hidden it, and how he broke the enchantment that lay upon Gunnlod, Suttung's daughter. Is a story often told around the hearths of men. 9 strong thralls were mowing in a field, as a wanderer went by clad in a dark blue cloak and carrying a wanderer's staff in his hand. One of the thralls spoke to the wanderer. "Tell them in the house of Bogi up yonder that I can mow no more, until a whetstone to sharpen my scythe is sent to me." "Here is a whetstone," said the wanderer. And he took one from his belt. The thrall who had spoken whetted his scythe with it and began to mow. The grass went down before his scythe as if the wind had cut it. "Give us the whetstone! Give us the whetstone!" cried the other thralls. The wanderer threw the whetstone amongst them, leaving them quarreling over it, and went on his way. The wanderer came to the house of Bogi, the brother of Suttung. He rested in Bogi's house, and at supper time he was given food at the great table. And while he was eating with the giant, a messenger from the field came in. "Bogi," said the messenger, "your 9 thralls are all dead. They killed each other with their scythes, fighting in the field about a whetstone. There are no thralls now to do your work. What shall I do? What shall I do?" said Bogi the giant. "My fields will not be mown now, and I shall have no hay to feed my cattle and my horses in the winter." "I might work for you," said the wanderer. "One man's work is no use to me," said the giant. "I must have the work of 9 men." "I shall do the work of 9 men," said the wanderer. "Give me a trial, and see." The next day Vectam the wanderer went into Bogi's field. He did as much work as the 9 thralls had done in a day. "Stay with me for the season," said Bogi, "and I shall give you a full reward." So Vectam stayed at the giant's house and worked in the giant's fields. And when all the work of the season was done, Bogi said to him, "Speak now, and tell me what reward I am to give you." "The only reward I shall ask of you," said Vectam, "is a draught of the magic mead." "The magic mead?" said Bogi. "I do not know where it is nor how to get it. Your brother Suttung has it. Go to him and claim a draught of the magic mead for me." Bogi went to Suttung. But when he heard what he had come for, the giant Suttung turned on his brother in a rage. "A draught of the magic mead," he said. "To no one will I give a draught of the magic mead. Have I not enchanted my daughter Gunnlod, so that she may watch over it? And you tell me that a wanderer who has done the work of 9 men for you asks a draught of the magic mead for his fee? O giant, as foolish as Gilling, O oaf of a giant, who could have done such work for you? And who would demand such a fee from you but one of our enemies, the Ezer? Go from me now, and never come to me again with talk of the magic mead." Bogi went back to his house and told the wanderer that Suttung would yield none of the magic mead. "I hold you to your bargain," said Vectam the wanderer, "and you will have to get me the fee I asked. Come with me now, and help me to get it. He made Bogi bring him to the place where the magic mead was hidden. The place was a cavern in the mountain. In front of that cavern was a great mass of stone. We cannot move that stone, nor get through it, said Bogi. I cannot help you to your fee. The wanderer drew an auger from his belt. This will bore through the rock if there is strength behind it. You have the strength, giant. Begin now, and bore. Bogi took the auger in his hands and bored with all his strength, and the wanderer stood by leaning on his staff, calm and majestic in his cloak of blue. I have made a deep, deep hole. It goes through the rock, Bogi said at last. The wanderer went to the hole and blew into it. The dust of the rock flew back into their faces. So that is your boasted strength, giant, he said. You have not bored halfway through the rock. Work again. Then Bogi took the auger again, and he bored deeper and deeper into the rock, and he blew into it, and lo, his breath went through. Then he looked at the wanderer to see what he would do. His eyes had become fierce, and he held the auger in his hand as if it were a stabbing knife. Look up to the head of the rock, said the wanderer. As Bogi looked up, the wanderer changed himself into a snake and glided into the hole in the rock, and Bogi struck at him with the auger, hoping to kill him. But the snake slipped through. Behind the mighty rock there was a hollow place, all lighted up by the shining crystals in the rock, and within the hollow place there was an ill-looking witch with long teeth and sharp nails. But she sat there rocking herself and letting tears fall from her eyes. O youth and beauty, she sang. O sight of men and women. Sad, sad for me it is that you are shut away, and that I have only this closed-in cavern, and this horrible form. A snake glided across the floor. Oh, that you were deadly, and that you might slay me, cried the witch. The snake glided past her. Then she heard a voice speak softly, Gunla, Gunla. She looked round, and there standing behind her was a majestic man, clad in a cloak of dark blue. Odin, the eldest of the gods. You have come to take the magic mead that my father has set me here to guard, she cried. You shall not have it. Rather shall I spill it out on the thirsty earth of the cavern. Gunlud, he said, and he came to her. She looked at him, and she felt the red blood of youth come back into her cheeks. She put her hands with their sharp nails over her breast, and she felt the nails drive into her flesh. Save me from all this ugliness, she cried. I will save you, Odin said. He went to her. He took her hands and held them. He kissed her on the mouth. All the marks of ill favor went from her. She was no longer bent, but tall and shapely. Her eyes became wide and deep blue. Her mouth became red, and her hands soft and beautiful. She became as fair as Gerda, the giant maid whom Frey had wed. They stayed looking at each other. Then they sat down side by side and talked softly to each other. Odin, the eldest of the gods, and Gunlud, the beautiful giant maiden. She gave him the 3 jars of the magic mead, and she told him she would go out of the cavern with him. 3 days passed, and still they were together. Then Odin, by his wisdom, found hidden paths and passages that led out of the cavern, and he brought Gunlud out into the light of the day, and he brought with him the jars of the magic mead, the mead whose taste gives wisdom, and wisdom in such beautiful words that all love and remember it. And Gunlud, who had tasted a little of the magic mead, wandered through the world, singing of the beauty and the might of Odin and of her love for him. Odin tells to Vidar, his silent son, the secret of his doings. Or is she? Sure, it was not only to giants and men that Odin showed himself in the days when he went through Jotunheim and Midgard as Vegtam the Wanderer. He met and he spoke with the gods also, with one who lived far away from Asgard, and with others who came to Midgard and to Jotunheim. The one who lived far away from Asgard was Vidar, Odin's silent son, far within a wilderness with branches and tall grass growing around him. Vidar sat, and nearby him a horse grazed with a saddle upon it, a horse that was ever ready for the speedy journey. And Odin, now, Veitan the Wanderer, came into that silent place and spoke to Vidar, the silent god. "O Vidar," he said, "strangest of all my sons, God who will live when all of us have passed away, God who will bring the memory of the dwellers of Asgard into a world that will know not their power. O Vidar, well, do I know why there grazes near by thee the horse ever ready for the speedy journey. It is that thou mayst spring upon it and ride unchecked, a son speeding to avenge his father. To you only, O Vidar the Silent One, will I speak of the secrets of my doings. Who but you can know why I, Odin, the eldest of the gods, hung on the tree Yggdrasil 9 days and 9 nights, mine own spear transfixing me. I hung upon that windy tree, that I might learn the wisdom that would give me power in the 9 worlds. On the 9th night, the runes of wisdom appeared before mine eyes, and slipping down from the tree, I took them to myself. And I shall tell why my ravens fly to thee, carrying in their beaks scraps of leather. It is that thou mayst make for thyself a sandal. With that sandal on thou mayst put thy foot on the lower jaw of a mighty wolf, and rend him. All shoemakers of the earth throw on the ground scraps of the leather they use, so that thou mayst be able to make the sandal for thy wolf-rending foot. And I have counseled the dwellers on earth to cut off the fingernails and the toenails of their dead, lest from those fingernails and toenails the giants make for themselves the ship Naglfar in which they will sail from the north on the day of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. More, Vidar, I will tell to thee. I will tell to thee. Living amongst men, have wed the daughter of a hero. My son shall live as a mortal amongst mortals. Siggi his name shall be. From him shall spring heroes who will fill Valhalla, my own hall in Asgard, with heroes against the day of our strife, with the giants, and with Searcher of the flaming sword. For long Odin stayed in that silent place, communing with his silent son, with Vidar, who with his brother would live beyond the lives of the dwellers of Asgard, and who would bring into another day and another world the memory of the Aesir and the Vanir. For long Odin spoke with him, and then he went across the wilderness, where the grass and the bushes grew, and where that horse grazed. In readiness for the sudden journey, he went toward the seashore where the Aesir and the Vanir were now gathered for the feast that old Aegir, the giant king of the sea, had offered them. Thor and Loki in the giant city. All but a few of the dwellers of Asgard had come to the feast offered by Aegir the Old, the giant king of the sea. Frigga, the queenly wife of Odin, was there, and Freya Iduna, who guarded the apples of youth, and Bragi, her husband, Tyr, the great swordsman, and Njord, the god of the sea, Skadi, who wedded Njord, and whose hatred for Loki was fierce, and Sif, whose golden hair was once shorn off by Loki the mischievous. Thor and Loki were there. The dwellers of Asgard, gathered together in the hall of Aegir, waited for Odin. Before Odin came, Loki made the company merry by the tales that he told in mockery of Thor. Loki long since had his lips unloosed from the thong that the dwarf Brock had sown them with, and Thor had forgotten the wrong that he had done to Sif. Loki had been with Thor in his wanderings through Jotunheim, and about these wanderings he now told mocking tales. He told how he had seen Thor in his chariot of brass drawn by 2 goats go across Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. None of the Aesir or the Vanir knew on what adventure Thor was bent, but Loki followed him, and Thor kept him in his company. As they traveled on in the brass chariot drawn by the 2 goats, Thor told Loki of the adventure on which he was bent. He would go into Jotunheim, even into Utgard, the giant's city, and he would try his strength against the giants. He was not afraid of aught that might happen, for he carried Mjolnir, his hammer, with him. Their way was through Midgard, the world of men. Once, as they were traveling on, night came upon them. As they were hungry and in need of shelter, they saw a peasant's hut, and they drove the chariot toward it, unyoking the goats and leaving them standing in a hollow beside the chariot. The 2, looking not like dwellers in Asgard, but like men traveling through the country, knocked at the door of the hut and asked for food and shelter. They could have shelter, the peasant and his wife told them, but they could not have food. There was little in that place, and what little there had been they had eaten for supper. The peasant showed them the inside of the hut. It was poor and bare, and there was nothing there to give anyone. In the morning, the peasant said he would go down to the river and catch some fish for a meal. "We can't wait until morning. We must eat now," said Thor, "and I think I can provide a good meal for us all." He went over to where his goats stood in the hollow beside the chariot of brass, and, striking them with his hammer, he left them lifeless on the ground. He skinned the goats then, and taking up the bones very carefully, he left them down on the skins. Skins and bones he lifted up, and bringing them into the house, he left them in a hole above the peasant's fireplace. "No one," said he in a commanding voice, "must touch the bones that I leave here." Then he brought the meat into the house. Soon it was cooked and laid smoking on the table. The peasant and his wife and his son sat round the board with Thor and Loki. They had not eaten plentifully for many days, and now the man and the woman fed themselves well. Thialfi was the name of the peasant's son. He was a growing lad, and had an appetite that had not been satisfied for long. While the meat was on the table, his father and mother had kept him going here and there, carrying water, putting faggots on the fire, and holding a blazing stick, so that those at the table might see to eat. There was not much left for him when he was able to sit down, for Thor and Loki had great appetites, and the lad's father and mother had eaten to make up for days of want. So Thialfi got little out of that plentiful feast. When the meal was finished, they lay down on the benches. Thor, because he had made a long journey that day, slept very soundly. Thialfi lay down on a bench too, but his thoughts were still upon the food. When all were asleep, he thought he would take one of the bones that were in the skins above him and break and gnaw it. So, in the dead of the night, the lad stood up on the bench and took down the goat skins that Thor had left so carefully there. He took out a bone, broke it, and gnawed it for the marrow. Loki was awake and saw him do this, but he, relishing mischief as much as ever, did nothing to stay the lad. He put the bone he had broken back in the skins, and he left the skins back in the hole above the fireplace. Then he went to sleep on the bench. In the morning, as soon as they were up, the first thing Thor did was to take the skins out of the hole. He carried them carefully out to the hollow, where he had left the goat standing. He put each goat skin down with the bones in it. He struck each with his hammer, and the goats sprang up alive, horns and hoofs and all. But one was not as he had been before. He limped badly. Thor examined the leg and found out that one bone was broken. In terrible anger, he turned on the peasant his wife, and his son. A bone of this goat has been broken under your roof, he shouted. For that, I shall destroy your house, and leave you all dead under it. Thialfi wept. Then he came forward and touched the knees of Thor. I did not know what harm I did, he said. I broke the bone. Thor had his hammer lifted up to crush him into the earth, but he could not bring it down on the weeping boy. He let his hammer rest on the ground again. You will have to do much service for me for having lamed my goat, he said. Come with me. And so the lad Thialfi went off with Thor and Loki. Thor took in his powerful hands the shafts of the chariot of brass, and he dragged it into a lonely mountain hollow, where neither men nor giants came, and they left the goats in a great, empty forest to stay resting there until Thor called to them again. Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi went across from Midgard into Jotunheim because of Mjolnir, the great hammer that he carried. Thor felt safe in the realm of the giants, and Loki, who trusted in his own cunning, felt safe too. The lad Thialfi trusted in Thor so much that he had no fear. They were long in making the journey, and while they were traveling, Thor and Loki trained Thialfi to be a quick and a strong lad. One day they came out on a moor. All day they crossed it, and at night it still stretched far before them. A great wind was blowing, night was falling, and they saw no shelter near. In the dusk, they saw a shape that looked to be a mountain, and they went toward it, hoping to find some shelter in a cave. Then Loki saw a lower shape that looked as if it might be a shelter. They walked around it, Loki and Thor and the lad Thialfi. It was a house, but a house most oddly shaped. The entrance was a long, wide hall that had no doorway. When they entered this hall, they found 5 long and narrow chambers running off it. It is an odd place, but it is the best shelter we can get, Loki said. You and I, Thor, will take the 2 longest rooms, and the lad Thialfi can take one of the little rooms. They entered their chambers, and they lay down to sleep. But from the mountain outside, there came a noise that was like moaning forests and falling cataracts. The chamber where each one slept was shaken by the noise. Neither Thor nor Loki, nor the lad Thialfi slept that night. In the morning, they left the 5-chambered house and turned their faces toward the mountain. It was not a mountain at all, but a giant. He was lying on the ground when they saw him, but just then he rolled over and sat up. Little men, he shouted to them. Have you passed by a glove of mine on your way? He stood up and looked all around him. Oh, I see my glove now, he said. Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi stood still as the giant came toward them. He leaned over and picked up the 5-room shelter they had slept in. He put it on his hand. It was really his glove. Thor gripped his hammer, and Loki and the lad Thialfi stood behind him, but the giant seemed good-humored enough. Where might ye be bound for, little men? Said he. To Utgard in Jotunheim, Thor replied boldly. Oh, to that place, said the giant. Come then, I shall be with ye so far. You men call me Skyrmir. Can you give us breakfast? Said Thor. He spoke crossly, for he did not want it to appear that there was any reason to be afraid of the giant. I can give you breakfast, said Skyrmir, but I don't want to stop to eat now. We'll sit down as soon as I have an appetite. Come along now. Here is my wallet to carry. It has my provisions in it. He gave Thor his wallet. Thor put it on his back and put Thialfi sitting upon it. On and on the giant strode, and Thor and Loki were barely able to keep up with him. It was midday before he showed any signs of halting to take breakfast. They came to an enormous tree. Under it, Skyrmir, I'll sleep before I eat, he said. But you can open my wallet, my little men, and make your meal out of it. Saying this, he stretched himself out, and in a few minutes Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi heard the same sounds as kept them awake the night before. Sounds that were like forests moaning and cataracts falling. It was Skyrmir snoring. Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi were too hungry now to be disturbed by these tremendous noises. Thor tried to open the wallet, but he found it was not easy to undo the knots. Then Loki tried to open it. In spite of all Loki's cunning, he could not undo the knots. Then Thor took the wallet from him and tried to break the knots by main strength. Not even Thor's strength could break them. He threw the wallet down in his rage. The snoring of Skyrmir became louder and louder. Thor stood up in his rage. He grasped Mjolnir and flung it at the head of the sleeping giant. The hammer struck him on the head. But Skyrmir only stirred in his sleep. "Did a leaf fall on my head?" he said. He turned around on the other side and went to sleep again. The hammer came back to Thor's hand. As soon as Skyrmir snored, he flung it again, aiming at the giant's forehead. It struck there. The giant opened his eyes. "Has an acorn fallen on my forehead?" he said. Again he went to sleep, but now Thor, terribly roused, stood over his head with the hammer held in his hands. He struck him on the forehead. It was the greatest blow that Thor had ever dealt. "A bird is pecking at my forehead. There is no chance to sleep here," said Skyrmir, sitting up. "And you little man, did you have breakfast yet? Toss over my wallet to me and I shall give you some provision." The lad Thialfi brought him the wallet. Skyrmir opened it, took out his provisions, and gave a share to Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi. Thor would not take provision from him, but Loki and the lad Thialfi took it and ate. When the meal was finished, Skyrmir rose up and said, "Time for us to be going toward Utgard." As they went on their way, Skyrmir talked to Loki. "I always feel very small when I go into Utgard," he said. "You see, I'm such a small and a weak fellow, and the folk who live there are so big and powerful. But you and your friends will be welcomed in Utgard. They will be sure to make little pets of you." And then he left them and they went into Utgard, the city of the giants. Giants were going up and down in the streets. They were not so huge as Skyrmir would have them believe, Loki noticed. Utgard was the Asgard of the giants, but in its buildings there was not a line of the beauty that there was in the palaces of the gods. Gladsheim and Breidablik, or Fensalir. Huge but shapeless the buildings arose, like mountains or icebergs. Oh, beautiful Asgard, with the dome above it of the deepest blue. Asgard with the clouds around it heaped up like mountains of diamonds. Asgard with its rainbow bridge and its glittering gates. Oh, beautiful Asgard. Could it be indeed that these giants would one day overthrow you? Thor and Loki, with the lad Thialfi, went to the palace of the king. The hammer that Thor gripped would, they knew, make them safe even there. They passed between rows of giant guards and came to the king's seat. "We know you, Thor and Loki," said the giant king, "and we know that Thor has come to Utgard to try his strength against the giants. We shall have a contest tomorrow. Today, there are sports for our boys. If your young servant should like to try his swiftness against our youths, let him enter the race today." Now Thialfi was the best runner in Midgard, and all the time he had been with them Loki and Thor had trained him in quickness, and so Thialfi was not fearful of racing against the giants' youths. The king called on one named Hugi and placed him against Thialfi. The pair started together. Thialfi sped off. Loki and Thor watched the race anxiously, for they thought it would be well for them if they had a triumph over the dwellers in Utgard in the first contest. But they saw Hugi leave Thialfi behind. They saw a giant youth reach the winning post, circle round it, and come back to the starting place before Thialfi had reached the end of the course. Thialfi, who did not know how it was that he had been beaten, asked that he be let run the race with Hugi again. The pair started off once more, and this time it did not seem to Thor and Loki that Hugi had left the starting place at all. He was back there almost as soon as the race had started. They came back from the racing ground to the palace. The giant king and his friends, with Thor and Loki, sat down to the supper table. "Tomorrow," said the king, "we shall have our great contest when Asa Thor will show us his power. Have you of Asgard ever heard of one who would enter a contest in eating? We might have a contest in eating at this supper board. If we could get one who would match himself with Logi here. He can eat more than anyone in Jotunheim." "And I," said Loki, "can eat more than any two in Jotunheim. I will match myself against your Logi." "Good," said the giant king, and all the giants present said, "Good. This will be a sight worth seeing." Then they put scores of plates along one side of the table, each plate filled with meat. Loki began at one end, and Logi began at the other. They started to eat, moving toward each other as each cleared a plate. Plate after plate was emptied, and Thor, standing by with the giants, was amazed to see how much Loki ate. But Loki on the other side was leaving plate after plate emptied. At last, the two stood together with scores of plates on each side of them. "He has not defeated me," cried Loki. "I have cleared as many plates as your champion, O king of the giants. But you have not cleared them so well," said the king. "Loki has eaten all the meat that was upon them," said Thor. "But Loki has eaten the bones with the meat," said the giant king. "Look and see if it be not so." Thor went to the plates. Where Loki had eaten, the bones were left on the plates. Where Loki had eaten, nothing was left. Bones as well as meat were consumed, and all the plates were left bare. "We are beaten," said Thor to Loki. "Tomorrow, Thor," said Loki, "you must show all your strength, or the giants will cease to dread the might of the dwellers in Asgard." "Be not afraid," said Thor. "No one in Jotunheim will triumph over me." The next day, Thor and Loki came into the great hall of Utgard. The giant king was there with a throng of his friends. Thor marched into the hall with Mjolnir, his great hammer, in his hands. "Our young men have been drinking out of this horn," said the king, "and they want to know if you, Asa Thor, would drink out of it a morning draught. But I must tell you that they think that no one of the Aesir could empty the horn at one draught." "Give it to me," said Thor. "There is no horn you can hand me that I cannot empty at a draught." A great horn, brimmed and flowing, was brought over to him. Handing Mjolnir to Loki and bidding him stand so that he might keep the hammer in sight, Thor raised the horn to his mouth. He drank and drank. He felt sure there was not a drop left in the horn as he laid it on the ground. "There," he gasped. "Your giant horn is drained." The giants looked within the horn and laughed. "Drained, Asa Thor," said the giant king. "Look into the horn again. You have hardly drunk below the brim." And Thor looked into it and saw that the horn was not half emptied. In a mighty rage, he lifted it to his lips again. He drank and drank and drank. Then, satisfied that he had emptied it to the bottom, he left the horn on the ground and walked over to the other side of the hall. "Thor thinks he has drained the horn," said one of the giants, lifting it up. "But see, friends, what remains in it." Thor strode back and looked again into the horn. It was still half filled. He turned round to see that all the giants were laughing at him. Asa Thor, said the giant king, "we know not how you are going to deal with us in the next feat, but you certainly are not able to drink against the giants," said Thor. "I can lift up and set down any being in your hall." As he said this, a great iron-colored cat bounded into the hall and stood before Thor, her back arched and her fur bristling. "Then lift the cat off the ground," said the giant king. Thor strode to the cat. determined to lift her up and fling her amongst the mocking giants. He put his hands to the cat, but he could not raise her. Up went Thor's arms. Up, as high as they could go. The cat's arched back went up to the roof, but her feet were never taken off the ground. And as he heaved and heaved with all his might, he heard the laughter of the giants all round him. He turned away, his eyes flaming with anger. "I am not wont to try to lift cats," he said. "Bring me one to wrestle with, and I swear you shall see me overthrow him. Here is one for you to wrestle with." "As a Thor," said the king. Thor looked round and saw an old woman hobbling toward him. She was blear-eyed and toothless. "This is Ellie, my ancient nurse," said the giant king. "She is the one we would have you wrestle with." "Thor does not wrestle with old women. I will lay my hands on your tallest giants instead." "Ellie has come where you are," said the giant king. "Now it is she who will lay hands upon you." The old woman hobbled toward Thor, her eyes gleaming under her falling fringes of gray hair. Thor stood, unable to move as the hag came toward him. She laid her hands upon his arms. Her feet began to trip at his. He tried to cast her from him. Then he found that her feet and her hands were as strong against his as bands and stakes of iron. Then began a wrestling match in earnest between Thor and the ancient crone Ellie. Round and round the hall they wrestled, and Thor was not able to bend the old woman backward nor sideways. Instead, he became less and less able under her terrible grasp. Blah! She forced him down, and at last he could only save himself from being left prone on the ground by throwing himself down on one knee and holding the hag by the shoulders. She tried to force him down on the ground, but she could not do that. Then she broke from him, hobbled to the door, and went out of the hall. Thor rose up and took the hammer from Loki's hands. Without a word, he went out of the hall and along the ways and toward the gate of the giant city. He spoke no word to Loki, nor to the lad Thialfi, who went without him for the 7 weeks that they journeyed through Jotunheim.